So good morning, everybody. My name is Kari Quaas. I am the, let's see, here we go. Community Engagement Project Manager at the Snohomish Conservation District. And I work with Carrie Brausieck, who is our speaker today. She's a natural resource planner and our agroforester, so loves trees. Both of us work on two of the different teams, and today she'll be covering the climate change resilience for landowners. Oops, let's see. There we go. And then if you could advance a slide, Carrie.
Oh, yeah, I guess that's true. I have control, don't I?
Yeah. So today for asking questions, we're going to have you utilize the chat. You can actually raise your hand, and that's going to be in the participants tab at the end to ask questions live of Carrie. So while she's speaking, if you could keep your audio lines muted, and then we are recording this class, and so you'll be able to see it later. I'll go to the next slide. So what is a conservation district? So we work for one of the 45 conservation districts across the state of Washington. We represent Snohomish County and Camino Island. And so that's why we love Country Living Expo. It's right on that edge. So we work with rural and urban residents on their habitat, soil health, resiliency, as we'll be speaking about today, water quality, and best management practices. So really the things that you can do where you live. So if you have any questions about the list there of things we have available, and what we're doing today is our adult education piece, please let us know. Next slide. So Carrie and I are both involved with this trees online discussion. It's an event we're doing next week. And the point is to actually kind of have a book club, if you will, to discuss trees. And we'll talk about 4 other topics throughout the year, every other month: soil, livestock, water, and technology tied to climate change. So if you're here today, there's a good chance you would find this discussion interesting. So go to snohomishcd.org/carbon crushers to learn more. Also, our plant sale is still happening because of COVID-19. We're doing a pre-order period, and that ends a week from Wednesday on the 10th. So theplantsale.org. So please join us. This today, we'd like to acknowledge the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and specifically their Renewable Energy Development Assistance, which we like to shorten to REDA, for helping provide this information. And then lastly, we'd like to really thank Washington State University Extension. Thank you so much for all your work for doing these. It takes a lot of effort to put together a conference. So thanks so much to our partners at WSU. Without further ado, I'd like to move it to Carrie.
All right, well, thank you, Kari. Uh-oh, there we go. No, what happened? Huh, okay. I need to stop sharing this and pull up, apparently.
Or your slideshow, yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't get added, it just was the one open.
All right.
Well, I'll just say while she's looking for that, that we were really are excited to have this trees class next week, which will talk on some of the things she'll be covering today. But we want, our main goal with that class is to truly hear from you out there and what you're doing at your property. So. Okay, there we go.
Uh-oh. Oh, okay, here we go.
All right.
All right.
It wouldn't be a proper class if there wasn't some technical glitch.
There we go. Okay.
All right.
All right. So yes, I am Carrie Brausieck, a natural resource planner with Snohomish Conservation District.
Carrie, one second.
I run our agroforestry program. I work on our ag resilience team. I do some climate change strategic planning with the district. I work with regenerative agriculture and permaculture and all of those types of things. So today we're going to talk about climate change resilience. And
Carrie, let me break in 1 second to say what we're seeing is the menu on your presentation slide, not your slides. So maybe it's on a different window.
It's okay. Let's see. Do you see it now?
Yes, there we go.
Great.
I see
Okay,
very
sorry.
arid land. Perfect. Thank you.
Climate change resilience.
Yep.
Okay, we're on the right track now. Thank you, Kari. Okay. And now it's not giving me any control. Oh, here we go. Okay. Okay. So a little overview of the presentation here, just give you guys an idea of the flow. I am going to cover some climate change predictions for the Pacific Northwest. And this may be information you have heard before through a presentation or reading an article. But in case you haven't been exposed to some of this info, we're just going to cover some of the latest data on our region specifically for what climate change is looking like. And then we're going to move into that resilience discussion and some different strategies, what we can do for building diversity, for building resiliency into our landscapes to climate change. Okay, and in 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released their latest report on the latest data, the latest scientific research on climate change. And then in 2019, they released some updated reports as well. And so in response to that, the University of Washington Climate Impact Group put together a report called No Time to Waste. And what this does is it takes that big global scale report of hundreds of pages of scientific data, and it synthesizes it down into some more digestible information for people like you and I who don't have time to read hundreds of pages of scientific data. And it also makes it local to our area. It talks about what the implications of these reports are for Washington State. So it's a great report to read if you want to know what some of those latest predictions, what some of the latest science is for Washington State. And that's the link to the report. Although if you type in CIG No Time to Waste into Google or something, or your search engine, this report's going to readily come up for you. So great report to check out if you want some of that latest information for our area. And I keep pushing, there we go. So based off that report, I'm going to give you guys just a real high level overview of some of the main points out of that report to get us started. So I do want to say though, we see some bullets here. What this is not saying that from this day forth, our climate is going to look like this. That's it. The climate is cyclical. It's going to go through cycles and continue to go through cycles. So we see warmer winters here, right? We will have winters that are cold. We will get winters that have big snowpacks. We might get summers that are rainy and cool. But what this is saying, what these bullets are representing, is that this is the trend our climate is moving towards. These types of things are going to look, they're going to be more frequent. Our weather is going to look more like this as we move into the coming decades than what we've been used to in the past. And so we can see we're looking at warmer winters and lower snowpacks. And that, we have a lot of river and stream systems that these snowpacks feed throughout the year. So during a warmer winter, if that snow is coming down more as rain or it's melting off more readily, that's going to rush down into our streams and rivers. And that's going to lead to, potential of more flooding during the winter months. And then those peak stream flows that we experience, those are going to come earlier in the year. And that means that then our streams and rivers may have these decreased flows in the summer if those snowpacks haven't been there or if they've melted off a lot earlier. So changes in the hydrology of our landscape. Sea level rise, and this is going to be variable depending on where along our coastline you're talking about. Some areas will experience less than this. Some areas will experience more. This is just the average along our coastline that we're looking to see in the coming decades here. By 2100 is their estimate. Dry years will become drier. They'll just be amplified. And that's really what climate change does, is it takes some of these weather patterns and it amplifies them. It just makes them more, right? So if we get a dry year, it's just going to be enhanced. And we're going to tend towards these warmer, drier summers overall. And the best example of this, we actually have a real world example we can think about, is that summer of 2015, where it was pretty hot and pretty dry for an extended period of time. And if you can remember back to that summer, that's really kind of what we're talking about. That's going to be the types of summers we start to see more and more. So these changes in our climate that we're starting to see, these changing trends, have implications for our forests, for our wildlife, for humans. So I'm just going to touch on some of those impacts. We're already starting to see some of these impacts, and some of these impacts are projected for us to be seeing in the coming decades. So for our forests, we're looking at expansion of certain species, dieback of other species. We're looking at increases in insect and disease outbreaks, and we're looking at drought stress. Drought stress is something we're already seeing quite a bit of, especially in certain species like western red cedar, western hemlock. And as some of these species start to experience this drought stress, as they're stressed out, they're more susceptible then to insect and disease outbreaks. So it's kind of a cycle that plays on each other. We could start to see changes in species composition in our forests, and individualistic species range shifts. So that means we may have, maybe it's western hemlock. We might start to see that move north more into more northern forests. We might see some species move up in elevation more, and then potential species extinction. Maybe in 50 years, we don't have western hemlock in our forests anymore. We may have a pine that starts to be dominant, right? So some of these implications for these changes in our climate to our forests. We have wildlife impacts. And with all the different changes with our forests, we have a lot of trees being stripped away from our river sides and our stream sides. And with increases in temperature, with these hotter summers, lower flows, we're getting increases in water temperatures. And a lot of our aquatic species are cold water species. They survive well in these cooler waters. And so this has implication for them for increasing disease risk, for hypoxia. And all hypoxia is cooler water holds more oxygen. As that water heats up, it doesn't hold as much oxygen, and these fish species cannot get the oxygen they need out of the water. We're seeing marine heat waves, and several years ago we had, maybe some of you heard of it, the blob out in the Pacific Ocean was a big marine heat event. And it had some pretty significant implications for a lot of our fish species, which then had implications for a lot of our marine mammals, our orca and things like that. And then we have impacts to our terrestrial species. And just to give you an example of a few, pika are those cute little marmot kind of things that live up in the Cascades. If you've ever been hiking up there, they sit on the rocks and they whistle to each other. They're real cute. They rely on these deep snowpacks to insulate themselves throughout the winter, as does the Cascades frog. And as those snowpacks, as we have years where those snowpacks are less or they melt off too soon, these species have a hard time surviving the winters. So that just gives you an example of some of the species that are feeling the impacts of this changing climate. And then we have impacts to humans. We live in an area where we traditionally have cooler summers. I mean, our summers don't get too hot. And so I remember I grew up in the area. We never had air conditioning in our home. My friends didn't have it, you know, where I worked didn't have air conditioning. And now we're getting these heat events in the summer. And this can have implications for vulnerable populations, for some of the elderly, for small children, especially if they can't get to cooler areas. The warmer, drier summers could have implications for yields in our food crops or for the types of food crops that we grow in our area. We're looking at possible winter and summer recreation losses. If we don't have that snowpack, it's hard to go skiing. If we have really low stream flows in the summer, it might be harder to go fishing. And then there's an economic impact. We're looking at having to change some of our infrastructure to deal with stormwater management, to deal with flood protection, installation of air conditioning on buildings. All of these types of things have a real economic impact. So, not to cast doom and gloom or make everyone depressed, this is actually supposed to be an inspirational talk and empower us to take action. So the good news is here's some cute baby animals to look at and make us all feel happy. It's Friday. Cute baby animals. These are all animals that are native here to our area. And the good news with climate change and with a lot of this information is that we have time. We have time to do things to help us adapt to these changes that we know are coming and to help us mitigate some of these changes. So we're going to move into that type of a talk now. This is a slide from Project Drawdown. And many of you may have heard of this or been exposed to this. If you have not, I encourage you to go to their website and check them out. This really has become a standard framework for how to talk about solutions to climate change and how to strategize solutions to climate change. And it's really become an international standard with governments, with universities, with NGOs, with cities. Lots of different organizations are using this framework to strategize ways forward when it comes to climate change. And you can get on their website and you can look at all these different solutions. What they've done is they have researched climate change solutions. They've done economic analysis, scientific research, and they have compiled a collection of climate change solutions that we have available to us now. We don't have to wait for new technology or anything like this. These are solutions that we have now available that we can all do. And it's great to get on their website and search through all those different solutions. So this first slide I want to show you because this is a great example of, it just really illustrates what's going on with climate change really well. And it's kind of like a balance sheet. So you can see we have the atmosphere there in the center. And on the left side there, what we have is these are all the main sources of emissions of greenhouse gases, right? Those things we do that are putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And we can see electricity is a big one there, and we're all pretty familiar with that. Food, agriculture, and land use is incredibly significant at 24% there. And not only do these things represent emissions, but they also represent key opportunities as well. So these are our emissions here on the left. On the right side, what we see is we see our land sinks and our ocean sinks. And what a sink is it's It's a natural system that pulls greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and stores them for us. And so naturally occurring in our environment, we have the ocean that does that, pulls a lot of greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, and we have land sinks that pull a lot of greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. So, and then we have sort of this 59% remaining, and we're looking at technologies and we're looking at things here. So we can really see what we need to do is we need to tackle both sides of this equation, right? We need mitigation strategies to reduce our emissions over here, but we also need strategies to protect our natural sinks over here and to amplify those sinks, to make them work more efficiently for us. So these are the solutions we have available to us today. We can go out and readily use these. And what this represents are the solutions. And so all these different solutions that are out there, it can seem overwhelming. I know, we're bombarded all the time. Oh, your diet. Oh, your garbage. Oh, your electricity, what car you drive, on and on and on and on and on, right? And it really starts to seem overwhelming. So they've taken the solutions and they've put them in these boxes, right? They've pulled out these themes of solutions. And the size of the box you see here represents how effective those solutions are towards climate change. So as individuals who are busy with limited time and resources, if we want to take some sort of action towards climate change, we can look at a graphic like this and we can pick a box that might be readily available or easy for us to do. And we can say, you know what? I'm going to look at food and agriculture here, right? I have a small farm. I'm going to see what I might be able to do with the way I grow food. I eat, we all eat. That's an easy one. I'm going to look at what kinds of food I eat, where I get my products from, my food waste, that's a huge one. And if I just looked at those things, I'm going to have a pretty significant impact on climate change, right? So it's a really interesting graphic to kind of see where you can fit in and that size of impact that those actions could have. So these major themes, like I said, from that graphic, food and agriculture, land use, how we use our land sinks. And really land sinks come down to two things, soil and trees. Those are the main things on our landscape that pull carbon and pull carbon out of the atmosphere and store that carbon for us. We have transportation, we have energy, social issues, and industry. So for our purposes moving forward, we're really going to talk about land sinks because this is building resiliency on our landscapes where we live. And so we're going to break that down into soil and trees and these things we can do around these land sinks. I do have energy highlighted there a little bit. We do have a rural energy program right now through the USDA. And I will, at the end of the talk, touch on this a little bit in case anyone might be interested in this. This is a grant that gives you some money towards installing alternative energy or doing energy efficiency upgrades to rural small businesses and to farms. So if you have a rural small business, if you have a farm, you might want to stick around for those couple of slides that I am going to address right at the end. And that will kind of talk about our energy box there a little bit too. But for the most part, we're moving on to land sinks, soil and trees. So when we're talking about our landscapes, our rural landscapes, and we're talking about climate change, we have a real opportunity here. Our landscapes, the potential of our landscapes to help combat climate change are huge. So what can we do? It really comes down to working to build resiliency on our landscapes. And what this does is it not only builds resiliency to our farm or our forest or our backyard, whatever it is, to changes in the climate, to a drought, to a flood. It helps build resiliency to that, but it also helps sequester carbon. So we're protecting our landscapes, our communities, and we're helping to combat climate change at the same time when we work to build resiliency into our landscapes. And what is resiliency? Simple definition here when we're talking about resiliency in context with climate change is strengthening the ability of systems to withstand and respond to changes in the Earth's climate. And these can be human systems, these can be ecological systems. So how do we build resiliency into our landscapes? Well, this can be pretty simple too. And if you don't remember anything else from this talk today, I want you to remember this one thing. This is kind of our mantra for the day. Diversity equals resiliency. When we're talking about natural landscapes, when we're talking about nature, diversity equals resiliency. I cannot say this enough times. Diversity in plants, diversity in animals and wildlife, diversity in structure. Diversity makes nature, makes natural systems more resilient. So just to key in on that soil piece, right? And how we would go out and take our soils and make them more resilient. Soils, like I said, as far as land sinks go, as far as sequestering carbon, we're learning more and more about the power of our soil to take in these greenhouse gases and to store these gases for us. And really what it comes down to is how we manage soil. Soils, they can emit greenhouse gases, or soils can sequester greenhouse gases. And it's all in how we manage them. And this graphic here shows, it's as of 2019, it was updated in 2019, the numbers, and it shows different sectors of the United States and their, their percentage of emissions of greenhouse gases, right? And we do see agriculture here. And right now, agriculture is about, give or take, 9% of our national greenhouse gas emissions. Now, if we had looked at this about 10 years ago, agriculture would have been about 13%. So agriculture is moving in the right direction. And the reason it is because we're learning about how to manage soils for their power to sequester carbon instead of emitting that carbon. And farms around the nation are starting to make these changes and move towards these new sort of management techniques. And so this number is getting better. And when we're talking about our soil, I would love you to visualize the soil as sort of the immune system of your landscape, right? If I take care of myself, I eat right, I exercise, I get enough rest, I make sure I'm not too stressed out, I have a good work-life balance, I'm gonna be a pretty healthy person. I may get exposed to a cold or a virus or something, and I might get sick for a few days, but I'll recover, right? Because I'm pretty healthy, I've got a good immune system. If I don't take care of myself, maybe I eat nothing but McDonald's, I don't exercise, I don't get enough sleep, and my immune system just isn't healthy. If I get exposed to something like a virus, I may get sick and I may suffer with that for a long time, and it may be hard for me to recover. The soil's the same way. It's our immune system. If your soil is healthy, whatever you're growing on that soil is going to be robust. It's going to be healthy. It may suffer a pest outbreak. There may be a flood or a drought, but it will recover more readily. It will be more resilient to things that hit it. Whereas if your soil is unhealthy and a pest outbreak comes along, or a drought comes along, those plants growing in that unhealthy soil, they're not going to be healthy. They're going to have a harder time recovering. And your system overall is going to be less resilient and it's going to suffer more damage if some of these things come along. So really, our soils are the immune systems of our landscape. And so what is a healthy soil? What does that mean? What makes a soil healthy? These are just some characteristics of a healthy soil. Healthy soils, they resist erosion and they resist nutrient loss. A good healthy soil has a lot of nutrients in it and it holds those nutrients and sort of interacts with root systems in this slow release process of exchange. Healthy soils nurture high populations of biological organisms. Diversity equals resiliency. All of these diverse organisms that live in your soil, earthworms, bacteria, fungi, micro and macro invertebrates, they all act within that profile and make that profile resilient and healthy. They interact with root systems that are growing in that soil. They exchange nutrients and sugars, and they take carbon and they store it. And these biological organisms are one of the keys to soil's ability to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere and store that carbon and exchange that carbon with plants and things like that. That diversity equaling the resiliency of your soil. A good, healthy soil does not require a lot of increasing inputs for high yields, for robust plants. And a good, healthy soil produces high quality crops, right? It's that immune system, that good, healthy immune system, robust, healthy plants. Whether you're growing trees, whether you're growing veggies, whether you're growing a lawn, that good, healthy soil is going to translate into good, healthy plants. And really, we can see great examples of good, healthy soil all around us. And the best place to really go take a look is out in nature, right? Walking into the forest, digging down under those leaves and grabbing some of that soil and taking a look at that. It's an amazing thing. It's got that great smell, that cool color, neat texture. Nature manages soil. When we're looking at natural soils and we're studying them, we're learning more and more about how these natural systems sequester carbon in the soils. Natural soils tend to be our soils that are sequestering carbon. These are our land sinks, right, for those greenhouse gases. And it's because of the way nature manages her soils. In nature, soil tends to stay protected. We don't have big swaths of bare soil with no root structures in it in nature, right? Yes, there might be a landslide, a tree might uproot and fall over or things like that, but nature works to cover that back up pretty readily. So in nature, soil tends to stay covered, protected. Nature grows in polycultures. Diversity equals resiliency. You don't go out in nature and see 1,000 acres of corn. You don't tend to go out in nature and see 200 acres of daffodils. You don't tend to go out and see 50 acres of pumpkins. You go out in nature and you see hundreds of different species growing together in a relatively small space, right? Hundreds and hundreds of species. Polyculture, because nature understands that diversity equals resiliency. And nature tends not to till soil. Soil is tilled in nature, but not in that mechanical way that we do. Well, it's mechanical, but not in the way that we till, right? Nature relies on those microorganisms, those macroorganisms, those earthworms, those root systems, the percolation of water, all those things that happen naturally in the soil profile tills that soil under the surface. So nature is doing that creating this cycle of fertility without going in and just turning that soil upside down and being dramatic about it. These soils tend to be soils that emit carbon, right? So that 9% we saw, right? The way humans tend to manage soils. And like I said, we're learning more and we're getting better, but these have been the trends. We tend to till our soils. We like to dig. We like to turn the soil over. We like to create these, you know, these pure beds of soils that we can plant into. We tend to like low diversity, and there are reasons for this, right? It's easy, it's straightforward, it's easy to manage. But we tend to like, you know, monocultures, 1 or 2 species. So we've gone and we've taken these complex systems that nature has and we've stripped them down, right? We've simplified them. We've stripped away the plant life, we've overturned the soil, and we've planted things back in, you know, 1 or 2 species. When we take away that diversity, we also strip away the ecosystem services that nature would have been providing. And because we take that away, we have to come back and we have to put that stuff back in ourselves. So now we might have to come in and apply fertilizers in systems like this. We might have to come in and apply some pesticides in a system like this. We also tend to leave soil kind of unprotected. We harvest our veggies in the fall and we kind of leave our garden beds just sit there. We, you know, we harvest, you know, that corn in the fall or whatever. We till up that soil and we just kind of let it set until, you know, spring planting next year. And this can be very damaging. So a system of soil that's sequestering carbon, a system of soil that is emitting carbon. And we can see the difference. So this seems pretty easy. If we want to harness the power of our soils to sequester carbon in our backyard, on our small farm, on our forest landscape, whatever it is that we have, that we own, we can start to go out and manage our soils more like nature would. We can start to reduce our tillage, right? I understand that in some systems, the need for tillage, you know, the need to till is there and it's real for many different reasons, right? But there's a lot of research now, there are a lot of techniques now for reducing the amount of tillage that we do. There are techniques for gardening now, no-dig gardening. There are all these techniques where we protect the soil and we dig in it as little as possible. We're still gonna dig in it, you know, we have to, we might wanna plant a tree or whatever, but lots of techniques now to limit that disturbance. And that's what we're going for, is just limiting our disturbance, really being conscious of when we really need to disturb the soil and when we can just leave the soil alone. Leaving our soil covered and protected, right? If those leaves fall off the trees, maybe we'll let those leaves sit there throughout the winter instead of stuffing them in bags and taking them, you know, to the dump or whatever. Maybe we cover our bed with straws, our garden beds with straw. One of the best things to do is to have some kind of living plants in our soils at all times of the year. And another great thing to do is that concept of diversity. Can we go out in our landscapes and look around and see where we can increase the diversity there? And that can even be in your backyard lawn, right? There are opportunities to increase diversity everywhere on our landscapes. A lawn, for example, we might have 2 or 3 grass species growing in a lawn. We can add in some plantain. We can add in some clover. We can add in some dandelion. And I know there's an aesthetic there, but this diversity makes these systems so much healthier. And really, and I touched on this a little bit, perennials. Perennials are key. Along with our soils, perennials are key to that soil's ability to sequester carbon. And the reason is that what perennials do is they put these living root systems in the soil year round, all the time. And all those little bugs, all those things, all that biological, sorry, my phone, all the little organisms that live in that soil profile, they survive because of these living root systems that they interact with that are always there in the soil profile. So the more living roots we have in our soil, the more little things, the little biological organisms we're going to have living in that soil, the more diversity we are going to have, the more resilient our soil is going to be, the better our immune system is going to be in our landscape. Those living roots, and then the ability of these perennials to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere is also immense. Any plant through photosynthesis sequesters carbon, but perennials are much more adept. They sequester much more carbon than annual plants do. And they store that carbon longer term than annual plants. So we've talked about soil, right? I said we're going to do land sinks, soils, and trees. So when we're talking about perennials, what is our apex perennial? It is the tree. This is the granddaddy perennial, right? They're amazing, and their ability to sequester carbon and store carbon long term is immense. You combine that with that power of the soil, and you've got a powerhouse system, a superhero of carbon sequestration. And we hear about trees, right? If we're paying attention to what's going on with climate change, trees have been in the news a lot too. Forests, right? The Amazon forest, old growth forests. The trees are the lungs of the planet, right? We've heard these things. We've seen articles about trees, about their power. And mature forests are important when it comes to climate change, because what mature forests represent is they represent our savings account, if you will. They represent a massive storehouse of carbon. They store a massive amount of carbon in their biomass and in their soils. They're a huge storehouse on this planet. The Amazon, the boreal forests that run across Canada, any old growth forests that we have left here in the Pacific Northwest, these are forests that are storing so much carbon that if we lose these, that is not a good thing. We cannot afford to put this carbon that these forests are storing for us into the atmosphere on top of what we've already got in there already. So these are highly important to be protecting these forests. If you have an old growth tree on your property, or you can be a champion for some old growth forests, it's very important for climate change. Young forests are also incredibly important. Reforestation, afforestation, planting some new trees on your property. New young trees, what they do, what they represent, is this super active sequestration of carbon, right? When trees are young, they're much more active at pulling that carbon out of the atmosphere to build their biomass. Did you wave at me, Kari?
Yeah. 9:45.
Oh, thanks. Okay, I need to speed along a little bit here. Thanks. So we can all plant trees, right? We all have that ability, whether that's on our own landscape, or whether that's in a park, or whether that's in some urban street trees, wherever we can find to interact and to help champion the planting of trees, we can do that. And we want to look at the diversity of trees. Again, diversity equals resiliency. We don't want to go out and just plant Doug fir, right? We want that diversity. And that diversity equals different ways of interacting with carbon and sequestering carbon, right? Our conifers, they represent these sort of slow growing, long-lived, big biomass structures that are really good at storing a lot of carbon over the course of their life, right? But we also have these young trees, these leafy trees like alder, like cottonwood. They grow fast, they photosynthesize a lot, they sequester a lot of carbon really quickly. So that diversity of different types of trees is important. Large leafy trees with wide crowns are great. They're photosynthesis powerhouses. I think the best native we have is the big leaf maple that represents a tree like this. And I'll talk about the big leaf maple a little bit. And then native species, wherever we can plant our natives, right? Those natives that are adapted to this climate, adapted to this environment, it's going to be a good thing. Wanted to give you guys some numbers just to give you an idea of what the potential of some of our natives are to sequester carbon. These numbers come from Evergreen State College and a project they did to estimate what some of our native trees, the potential of some of them to sequester carbon. And we can see some of our natives here: Western red cedar, its average lifespan, and at maturity, the amount of carbon that that tree would sequester, right? We've got the red alder in there, one of those fast growing trees. We've got the big leaf maple, and look at what a powerhouse this tree is. It is the best of all worlds, right? It's a long-lived tree. It's got this wide crown and these giant leaves. It is a photosynthesis powerhouse. And it can sequester an amazing amount of carbon over the course of its lifespan. Oak trees would be similar to this, right? And the big leaf maple is so cool because it's an ecosystem unto itself as well. It not only sequesters carbon, but it supports on its own body structure all this other plant life, from mosses to ferns, and it supports so much of our local wildlife as well. Big leaf maples are amazing. I'm going to not get into climate analogs just in the interest of time here, but I did want to give you guys an idea of the potential of some of our natives to sequester carbon. So we've got forests, right? We know we can plant trees in forests. We know we can plant natives. But what about trees on our farmlands? And that's the program I run, right? Agroforestry, which is about planting trees back into farmlands. Planting trees into our pastures, planting trees into our annual cropping systems. We're learning more and more about the benefit of planting trees back into our farmlands and combining annual production of crops and grazing of livestock with these apex perennials. And in a diverse system like this, right? We're adding diversity, we're creating resiliency, and we're making these healthier ecosystems where, when they're designed properly, everything in that system benefits. Livestock, I should have put a picture up here. I go out all the time, and I drive by these big open pastures in July or whatever. And for some reason, there might be a tree, like one lone tree out there in the pasture. And there will be a bunch of cows, and where are they? Whoa, they're all under that tree, right? Livestock love trees, and they benefit from trees, right? So there are ways to design trees into our pastures. There are ways to design trees into our annual cropping. And the potential of these systems to sequester carbon is vast, and that's what this little chart shows. We see these land uses, and we see the potential of this land use to sequester carbon over the course of a year. And here's agroforestry, adding trees back into our agricultural lands has a massive potential for carbon sequestration, for building resiliency, for adding diversity, for all these great things. So we can add trees back into our ag lands too. And urban trees. I also want to give a shout out to urban trees. You know, maybe some of us live in urban spaces. Urban trees have so many benefits, from creating microclimates, cooling the temperatures, adding health, social and mental benefits to people. So urban trees can be important in all types of spaces that we occupy. So we're towards the end here. Just want to give a recap of what we talked about. We're facing changing trends in our climate. We can see that. We're facing those associated impacts. Some of those we're already feeling. And how we respond to climate change can feel really overwhelming. We're bombarded with so much information all the time. But when we start to synthesize it down, when we can look at a great framework like they've given us with the Drawdown Project, right? We can start to see where we have the power. And especially if we're a landowner, even if you have a backyard, we have the power to participate in the solution of climate change with how we manage our soils, with the ability to plant trees, and with that and with all of that comes that addition of resiliency to our landscapes, to these changes that are coming. That power in the soil and that power of trees. It's really that simple on our landscapes. It comes down to those two things. So really, when we synthesize it down like that, that's doable. It's not that overwhelming anymore. You know, and if we all start to make some of these changes, if we all start to do this, these collective actions start to have a bigger and bigger effect, right? If I start to do some of this, my neighbor starts to get curious as to what I'm doing. Maybe they start to plant a tree, or they do something different with their soils, right? And we create this system that amplifies itself outwards. And we build resiliency into our landscapes, into our yards. We build resiliency for our pets, for our livestock, for our gardens, for the plant life that we're growing. And we build resiliency for all of our neighbors, right? All these other amazing species that we share this amazing environment with, and that bring up our quality of life here. So that's our resiliency piece. And just to touch really quick on energy, and the reason I'm doing this is because we actively have a program right now that I want to let you guys know about. And it's the Rural Energy for America program funded through the USDA. And what this does is it helps people who have farms or have rural small businesses implement projects on their property for energy efficiency upgrades or for alternative energy, installing solar panels or wind or things like that. What we offer through this program, what we can offer you if you're someone who fits into this and is interested in this, we can offer you technical assistance. We can help you get in touch with contractors. We help you apply for the grant. So we actually do the paperwork for you to apply for the grant for the funding. And we can also help you with additional resources if you need them. And these just give you an idea of some of the projects that are available. Solar arrays, energy efficiencies, wind, solar heating, bioenergy, microhydro, these types of things. So that's it. This is my contact info. If you have any questions, if you're interested in some of this stuff on your landscapes too, I will say we do come out And for free, we can come out and visit your property with you if you're in Snohomish County around Camino. And we can offer some technical assistance. We can, I can come out and brainstorm with you how you might manage your soil differently, or where you could plant some trees or things like that. So we also offer that service.
That's great, Carrie. I keep putting different things in the chat, and I'm going to go back to the group view now because we do have some questions from the audience. And one of them was about if there's grants available to help pay to get trees in the ground, Carrie.
There are, or are there? Is that a question? That's
a question. Are there grants available to help get trees in the ground?
So there are. They can be very specific. And you do have to do some digging. U.S. Arbor Day Foundation sometimes has grants. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Summit, Department of Forestry sometimes will do grants for small forest projects. I personally am working on applying for grants for agroforestry, for helping provide funding to farmers who want to add trees into their pastures or want to add trees into some of their annual cropping. So I actually have some proposals in the works now, fingers crossed that we get money for those. So yes, there are grants out there for planting trees in certain contexts. Yeah, it depends on what kind of landscape you have and what you're doing.
Yeah. And then the plant sales, I put that in the link or in the chat too. And again, people feel free to save the chat because then you can get those links as well. But our plant sale, we sell at cost basically. So it's a cheap way to get plants and trees into the ground. And then you can always kind of build up over the years. Skagit's plant sale is going to be open very soon. They're also doing pre-order. All of us are trying to take it safe by doing pre-order drive-through sort of pickups. Now I'm going to change gears on you, Carrie. There was a question about the REAP one. If we expect it to be expanded under the new administration, isn't there quite limited funding for the rural energy program?
There has been limited funding. And I mean, yes, that is the hope, is that it will be expanded, right? There's also been a federal tax incentive that has been starting to decline each year pretty readily. So the hope is that that may start to work its way back up as well. Like it declined down to 22% this year. And I think next year it's going to go down to 10%. So hopefully with new administration, that may climb back up to more like 25%, 30% for some of those incentives. Yeah.
That's great. And if anybody wants to raise their hand, you can do that in the participants tab, and then you can actually speak your question too instead of typing. I know sometimes I can think or speak faster than type. But I am just a couple kudos to you, Carrie. Thanks so much. Really appreciate the synthesis of different sources of information and a clear presentation. Also, thanks for a great presentation. Appreciate the links and hearing the latest.
And I do want to give one more plug too to our little thing on the 3rd of February.
Yeah.
So on the 3rd of February, what we're going to be doing is talking about climate change and trees and the power of trees and all the different ways we can plant trees. And what the point is not for me to talk at you for another 45 minutes, right? But for you to come and share your experiences, or connect with others to find resources. If you have done some agroforestry, if you have done community food forests, if you've done some new forestry type management. So it's kind of sort of a networking opportunity and an opportunity to share and to brainstorm strategies for these great ways that we can incorporate trees into our landscape.
Yeah, and it's our intent not to record those. They were just going to be be a one-shot deal. So please show up to discuss. And then we sent some resources out yesterday. We'll send some after thoughts as well to the group, and then we'll send more resources before the next one. So if soil is your thing, then show up to that one in April. Or if you're really interested in water, then August is when we're talking about that. So we're trying to put them into time context where we're all like, oh my gosh, it's so dry outside. How do I water? Or now we're talking about our livestock because we need to feed them. It's summertime. So check out the list on the page that I put in the chat. Yeah.
And thank you all for coming this morning. Enjoy the rest of the conference. There's a ton of cool stuff out there.
Indeed. Any more questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand or just talk at this point.
I have a quick question. Do you have any suggestions of species of trees that would be slower growing or shorter at maturity for areas around power lines? My place is surrounded by power lines, and so everything's constantly getting topped or cut down because the alders get cut down even eventually. And we had some big leaf maple growing, but it was right under the power lines, and so they got cut down. And so any suggestions on that?
Especially if you have a drier soil, a good tree might be shore pine. Okay. It's kind of slow growing. It's really drought tolerant. It is short. It's not going to grow up, depending on how high those power lines are. It's short. Okay. That might be that just off the top of my head as a native, and it's called shore pine. It tends to grow along shorelines, but on our rocky shorelines. But we have been using it to plant in upland spaces. It does very well. It adapts very well, and it's shorter and it's long lived, and it's a great tree for a space like that, I think.
Great. Yeah, but we also, a lot of that is very marshy too. So.
Okay, so marshy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The cottonwoods spring up and then they have to get cut down.
Okay, yeah, if it's marshy.
We do have some hazelnuts and that in spots, but I don't know if that says.
You might do some more shrubby type of plantings.
Okay, yeah.
Some shorter willows, some things like that. Okay. They're also perennials. They're great. They're going to sequester a lot of carbon, but you might key in more on some of our marshy loving shrubs.
Okay. And any suggestions on how to keep the blackberries from overwhelming them? The Himalayan blackberries from just taking, because that's pretty much what's there is Himalayan blackberries.
Get a goat.
Yeah. Jackie has a question on blackberries. I would say it's
no, it's not a question. It's a suggestion that if you're looking for a tree, a native tree in marshy areas, can I suggest Oregon crabapple, Pacific crabapple, Malus fusca, which is not a tall growing tree, and it might be suitable for your location.
Yes, that's a great one, Jackie. You know what's cool about that tree too is you can use the rootstock to graft on some edible apples. Jackie knows about that too.
Yeah, I have 20-ouncer trees that I've got a 250-year-old trees that I've grafted. I've got about 8 others that I've grafted from them on other rootstocks, but that's around the house.
So that'd be cool because it would tolerate that marshy wetness, but you could graft on some, kind of more dwarf edible, some more tasty apple varieties.
Find that tree. Will you guys have that in the plant sale? Nope. Okay.
Do we have Malus fusca? Do we have crabapple, Kari?
We do have Pacific crabapple, but it's sold out for this year. But we've had it over the years, so I would expect it would be back for 2022. Yeah, we had an abundance of early bird shoppers. Let's just put it that way. Let's say. But I'll put it in the link in the chat so you can see what it's like. But yeah, the best thing you can do for our plant sale is get on the mailing list so that way you know when pre-orders are opening and then you're ready to go. And hopefully we'll be back in person again without snow or a pandemic or anything else weird keeping us from having our event.
And a new high school.
And
Yeah.
then we'll be able to do this again at the high school. Yeah, the future is looking bright. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, but feel free again if you have some questions. Okay. All right, well, I'm going to stop the recording and then thank everybody for being here. Thanks so much, Carrie. That was great. I get something out of your presentation every single time.
Thanks.
Thanks, you guys.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.